Did Crooks fire 8 shots?
We have recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
Why was Crooks allowed to get off 8 shots?
Well, that, I think, is something we're still digging into.
Why was President Trump not kept off the stage?
We don't know the answer to that, but I want to be clear, and this is important because I think it goes to questions that I can and cannot answer. Our investigation, the FBI's mandate, is focused on the shooter. We are investigating the shooter both to determine his motive and his preparations and activities before the shooting, but also to make sure whether or not there are any co-conspirators, accomplices.
At this point, have you developed any evidence to so suggest that there are any accomplices or cooperators or assisters?
Not at this time, but again, the investigation's ongoing.
Unmanned aerial surveillance operator on site. Was there? And why did that person not prevent Crooks from being able to use a drone?
What I can tell you when it comes to drones is that Crooks himself had a drone, and I'm prepared to answer questions here today about the shooter and his use of the drone, for example.
Gentleman yields back. Director, let me go back to where Mr. Bishop was. Tell me about the drone. You act like you wanted to fill us in on that. Fill us in.
So we have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered.
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window, on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area.
2 hours.
About 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know. So again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the route.
About 200 yards away, yes.
Okay, that's important information. What about the bombs that we've heard about in the shooter's car?
So again, the FBI lab is exploiting those explosive devices.
Yep.
We've recovered 3 devices, 2 in his vehicle and 1 back in his residence.
Are these what you would call, your experts would call sophisticated operations, or this? I don't know. That's what I've been told by people who have some understanding of this area.
Yeah, I think it's we've seen more sophisticated and less. I would say these are relatively, again, keyword relatively crude devices themselves, but they did have the ability to be detonated remotely. And so to that point, in addition to the 2 devices that we recovered out of his vehicle, there were receivers for those 2 explosive devices with the devices. And then on the shooter himself, when he was killed by law enforcement, he had a transmitter with him. Now, I do want to add one important point here, is at the moment, it looks to us, again, ongoing review, and I can't say that too many times, at a moment, it looks like because of the on-off position on the receivers, that if he had tried to detonate those devices from the roof, it would not have worked. Okay. But that doesn't mean the explosives weren't dangerous.
I'm sure we're going to get into all these subjects a little bit later as well. Tell us what you can about the encrypted platforms we've heard about.
So one of the things that we're drilling into hard with the shooter in an effort to try to learn more about his state of mind, his motive, his ideology, his context, everything else, is to look at all of his devices, any social media accounts he had, et cetera. And one of the things we've learned in finally getting into his phone, which was also a significant technical challenge from an encryption perspective. But in addition, once we got on the phone, it turned out he was using some encrypted messaging applications.
And again, the same question relative to the bombs. Was this pretty sophisticated, or is this the kind of the norm you see with folks like, similar situation? How would you describe
on this subject, I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI, but state and local law enforcement all over the state.
Tell me exactly the scope does the scope of your investigation include what I call that critical 5 minutes from when the 6:09, when this is based, I think, on the information you've given to Congress, 6:09 when the shooter's identified on the roof, and 6:14 when President Trump is ultimately escorted off, and all that happens, the shots that take place in between there. Do you have access to the communications that were going on at the time in that critical 5 minutes?
So our investigation, when you say scope, our investigation includes that time frame, although focused again on the shooter himself and his death.
Now, as part of that, he's obviously involved in that time frame.
Correct, and as part of that, as part of our focus, our investigation of the shooter and the attack, Of course, we are interviewing law enforcement from the scene because those are some of the most significant witnesses, and we're obviously getting access to their materials and that kind of thing. And the Secret
You're
Service
getting
has been
access
fully
to
cooperative.
you have access to the communications that exist there.
That exact question, I don't, as I sit here at the moment, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I know that Secret Service has been cooperative with us.
The Congress would like access to those communications as well. I mean, not just that 5 minutes, although I think that's the critical time frame. There's lots of communications we'd love to have access as well. I see my time is up, and they have called votes on the floor. I think there are about 6 minutes left in votes, so committee will stand in recess until approximately 10 minutes after votes conclude on the House floor.
But I was interested in what you're seeing on his phone. The press has reported that he had pictures not only of Mr. Trump, but of Mr. Biden and various other members, political figures. Can you discern, was there an element of mainly Republicans, maybe Democrats? Was it all over the board? Can you enlighten us about that?
Well, this is a place where it's particularly important for me to reiterate the caveat that I've included before, because in this instance in particular, we have a lot of legal process out for additional accounts and things like that that the shooter is associated with. So we're hoping to learn more, and we're still exploiting a number of the digital devices.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that we do not yet have a clear picture of his motive, and I think it's important for me to explain, because I understand, of course, why everybody wants to know the answers to those questions. Often in an investigation, from interviewing people that the subject was in close contact with, looking at the individual's social media accounts, messages, often things, physical evidence in the person's residence, you might see a manifesto, things like that. We're not seeing that yet, but we are digging in hard because this is one of the central questions for us. What I can say is that the shooter appears to have done a lot of searches of public figures in general, but so far we're seeing kind of news articles and things like that, and so the images that have been reported about, really what we're talking about there are when you do a news search of an article, the image appears in the cache, as opposed to like a search for that specific individual. But again, I really want to be clear that that's a place that we're doing a lot of work right now, and so more to come on that.
Can you tell us about how the origin of this gun purchase was discovered and the technology used?
I guess what I can say is we located a number of firearms associated with the shooter and his family. I think it was a total of 14 in the house. The weapon that he used for the attempted assassination was an AR-style rifle that was purchased legally, that he, is my understanding, acquired, I think bought actually from his father, who was the one who originally bought it, again, legally.
You do the advanced threat assessment and deliver that information as to the general threat and then specifics as to protected people to the Secret Service. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. The Secret Service does a threat assessment, but they're doing that based on intelligence that they receive from a number of sources, including, of course, the FBI. So we share, whenever we have threat information related to a particular individual or protectee, then we share it with the Secret Service at a number of levels.
So you're a participant, but ultimately the responsibility for threat assessment as to these individuals belongs to the Secret Service.
Well, again, the threat assessment for the individual belongs to the Secret Service, but we are an important part of that because we share threat information, if we have any. They get threat information from a variety of sources.
So, and you get them from that same variety of sources. They've got no sources that are excluded from the FBI, do they?
Well, I don't know. I'm not aware of any that are excluded from the FBI, but they may receive information that comes directly to them that didn't come to us.
Sure. Okay. Director, do you believe that former President Trump was a high-risk threat under your assessment?
Well, I believe that former President Trump, really, frankly, like any president or former president, is a very high-profile figure and attracts a lot of, unfortunately, the kind of threats we've been talking about.
It's fair to say, not on a scale of 1 to 1,000,000 with little nuances, but on a scale of 1 to 10, President Trump's risk was very similar to a current president, very similar to, because he was the presumptive nominee and leading in the polls and so on, that he was a high risk by any standard. Is that correct?
Certainly, there's a reason why he has so much protection around him.
Okay. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the son of assassinated senator and the nephew of an assassinated president, would you say he was also, as a presidential candidate, at significant risk?
Again, I think any presidential candidate raises some level of risk. It might vary from candidate to
No, but it's clearly a risk. Okay. In a nutshell, the day before this attack, President Trump was documented not to have gotten on multiple occasions from the Secret Service what they asked for. The day after, it looks like they're getting more. The day before, RFK had been denied by the president multiple times, Secret Service protection. The day after, he now has it. So now my question is the actions of a 20-year-old with a lone gunman on a roof sufficient to change the risk assessment in your mind for President Trump and RFK? Or are we just realizing the threat that was always there and being more appropriate in matching it? And I know that's a little vague, but you've been at this for a long time. Hindsight is 20/20. Now that we have hindsight, is it fair to say that giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. security, upping the security, including drones, overhead support for the president, former president, these are all things that in hindsight should have been done the day before?
Well, let me try to answer your question this way. Of course, as I said, the assessments of the level of security to be provided to individual protectees.
No, I understand it's a Secret Service decision.
But what I would say to you is that, and I've been saying for quite some time, including in front of committees of this Congress, that we are in an elevated threat environment, and we have been for some time. And that comes from a variety of quarters. It is quite frankly a dangerous time to be a prominent public official.
And in regards to that,
Director, when did the FBI learn that Iran was threatening President Trump's life?
So I want to be a little bit careful here, not to talk about specific classified information, but we have been for quite some time, and I'll stick with what's in the open record. We, for some time, and I in particular for some time, have been calling out the efforts by the Iranian government to attempt to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani by going after current or former prominent U.S. officials, and we've even had an indictment against it. And I think that we need to recognize the brazenness of the Iranian regime, including right here in the United States. And I expect that we're going to see more of it, and I expect there'll be more coming on that. I'm not aware of any threat information related to protectees that wasn't, passed in a timely way, but I can't really get into specifics here. Any information related to threats against the former president, which again, as we've sort of talked about, is happens all too often, is something that we have a whole process we routinely share with the Secret Service at a number of levels in a timely way, and to my knowledge, that has consistently been followed.
Butler, Pennsylvania, I read something about a ladder. He used a ladder to get up on that roof, and that the ladder was found somewhere a distance away. Is that true?
So we do know that he purchased a ladder. I think, if I recall correctly, it was about a 5-foot tall type of ladder. But importantly, we did not find the ladder at the scene. So it's not clear that he used the ladder to get on top of the roof.
So you don't think
we're
the ladder...
still digging into all that, things related to the ladder and his access to the roof. But he did buy a ladder, but the ladder was not found at the scene.
How many shots did the shooter fire?
Well, we know that he fired at least 8 because we recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
Okay, and are all the cartridges and the unspent bullets, have they been, you know how many there are? You've accounted for all of those? I assume, yeah.
We believe we have. Again, was lots of work still ongoing, but yes, we believe we have accounted.
And did the recovered shells, the cartridges, match the shooter's rifle?
My recollection is yes.
And you conducted analysis that confirms that?
Well, we work with ATF, but yes, so some of the work has been divided up.
And how many shells, casings were recovered from the location of the counter snipers?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
From the counter snipers' location?
That I don't have the answer, at least here at my fingertips.
Okay. I'm wondering if the blood and tissue and brain matter is consistent with the testimony that you're receiving. In other words, is the physical...
In terms of the manner of death?
Exactly. Is the physical evidence consistent with where the shot from the counter sniper took place?
Yeah, so the autopsy is being handled by, as is not unusual, the state authorities. My understanding is thus far, I don't think it's fully complete, which is not totally unusual. But so far, nothing remarkable on that front.
That's from the body itself, but from actually the scene, where the shooter was found, is everything consistent with the testimony, the physical evidence at the scene? Is that consistent with the testimony you've seen, that you've heard so far?
So far, yes. Again, ongoing investigation.
Were you able to determine whether the shooter took the gun up with him when he climbed up to the top of the roof, or was it already placed there somewhere?
So that is something that we're drilling into right now that we don't know the answer to yet. I can tell you, which may be relevant, though, to your question, that, and I don't think this has been reported yet, that the weapon had a collapsible stock, which could explain why it might have been less easy for people to observe. Because one of the things that we're finding is people have observed him, the first people to observe him with the weapon were when he was already on the roof, and we haven't yet found anybody with firsthand observation of him with the weapon walking around beforehand. So that doesn't mean he wasn't, obviously, but the collapsible stock is potentially a very significant feature that might be relevant to that.
Did he have a scope?
I believe so, but as I sit here right now, I don't remember.
Okay. You mentioned about 2 hours before the incident that he'd had a drone and he was using a drone. Instead of me putting words in your mouth, just tell me how you discovered the drone, how you discovered the time, and how you discovered, if you can describe what he would have been observing with the drone and how you determined that, please.
So this is something that's very much ongoing right now. We're going back and forth with our lab as they continue to do work on it. What I would say is the drone was in his car. As I said, we've been able to, by exploiting the drone, determine its use and flight paths. There were no pictures or videos on the drone of the day of the rally, for example, but we have been able to reverse engineer the flight path of the drone from the day of the rally, and that's how we know that for about 11 minutes, from I think it's around 3:50 p.m. to 4 p.m., somewhere in that range, he was flying the drone, and we have the flight path. It's about 200 yards away from where former President Trump would ultimately be speaking. And so that would have primarily given him a vantage point. I'm trying to think how to describe this. If the former president's podium is that way,
yeah,
the drone would be over here looking, say 200 yards again off this way, looking back. So it would have shown the shooter, we think, again, we're still doing more work on this. I really want to qualify what I'm saying, but I'm trying to be transparent and lean in here. We think it would have shown him kind of what would have been behind him.
But when you say behind him, behind the shooter.
Correct. Like in other words, almost like giving him a rear view mirror of the scene behind him, except again, he wasn't flying it overhead while he was later back for the assassination.
But he would have had, with the drone, he would have been able to also assess kind of because the stage, I assume, was already set, he would have been able to assess that angle with the rooftop as well, forward and backward, I assume.
Well, certainly going towards the podium. Again, we're still trying to figure out exactly what he saw because we're having to, in effect, because there's no recording of what he saw during those 11 minutes, our hypothesis at this point, the experts think he would have been live streaming it. And so we're trying to, in effect, say, okay, if this was the flight pattern, given these capabilities of the drone, what would you have seen? What could you have seen for those 11 minutes? And again, it wasn't over the stage or the kind of the hub of the rally. It was about 200 yards away, but it looks like it would have been looking, let's say, length of a football field or so, more, kind of towards the podium.
Great, thank you, Mr.
How many separate times was the shooter on the premises?
So again, with the caveat that we're continuing to do work on it, we believe that the first time he traveled to the grounds was, I think, a week before, and he spent roughly 20 minutes there. Then he went to the grounds again on the morning of the event, it appears, for about 70 minutes, I think. But again, I qualify that. I'd have to go back and look to be sure of that part. And then he came back in the afternoon, so that would be, I guess, a third time for good. But that included things like this drone activity we just talked about.
Have you been able to gain access to the shooter's electronic communications?
So in terms of our ability to access it, we have been able to get into and exploit a number of electronic devices, digital devices, but not all of them yet. And then within his various accounts, we've been able to get access to some of them, but some of them we're still waiting on. Some of them we may never get access to because of the encryption issue, that it presents an increasingly vexing barrier for law enforcement, not just the FBI, but for law enforcement all over the country. But we're still drilling into that. We have some information. Some places we've been able to look, some places we will be able to look, some places we may never be able to see, no matter how good our legal process is. But that's what we're looking at right now. In terms of what we've been able to find so far, a lot of the usual repositories of information have not yielded anything notable in terms of motive or like ideology. Having said that, it does appear fairly clear that he was interested in public figures, kind of more broadly, and I think this is important, that starting somewhere around July 6th or so, he became very focused on former President Trump and this rally. And so one of the things that I can share here today that has not been shared yet is that we've just in the last couple of days found that from our review, to your point about devices, analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally. The images that we've recovered so far from, I can't remember which of his various devices, appeared to be what we call cached images from searches of news articles. So if you do a news article search, of course, if there are photos on it, those photos get stored automatically in your cache, as opposed to me searching or him searching for a specific person and getting up images of that person. As far as the pictures that are like that, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it so far, other than these are all prominent public people, but they cover both parties, they cover both U.S. people and even some foreign public officials. So that part doesn't appear to, that one repository of information doesn't appear to be overly indicative of motive, other than interest in public figures, but that could be just because he was reading news stories. So we're still trying to drill into that. That's why all of these outstanding legal process returns that we're waiting on for various accounts, platforms, et cetera, any one of them could be one that would have very indicative, very important information. The information I just described at the moment does not appear particularly indicative of targeting in its own right. But again, that dot, once we get other information, could connect in a way that might be more meaningful. But I'm sharing that piece of information with this committee and with the American public, but I think it's important that we put down a qualification. This does not appear to be some kind of target list or something like that. This is cached images from running searches of news stories. And again, there's nothing at the moment, there's no pattern from that particular piece of information that is overly remarkable so far.
Thank you.
Director Wray, how many counter snipers were present at the rally that day, and which of the counter snipers took the shot that took out the would-be assassin?
I don't have the number of counter snipers. I know it was a Secret Service counter sniper who took the shot that eliminated the shooter. And we've conducted a number of interviews, including of him.
So was it one of the two that we see in the videos on top of the roof, or was it a different location that was shot?
I'm afraid I don't have that at my fingertips here.
Okay. You mentioned that the would-be assassin bought a 5-foot ladder. You have a credit card evidence of that. But it looks like on the scene there was a larger ladder that he might have used. Do you know which ladder he used to get to the roof? And do you have possession of that 5-foot ladder and the other ladder? And do you know how the taller ladder got to the scene?
So this whole business about the ladder is something we're drilling into more. We do have possession of the 5-foot ladder that he purchased close in time to his attempted assassination, that we've traced the purchase of that ladder from a receipt, a bloodied receipt that he had on him at the time his body was recovered on the roof. We do not yet know for sure how exactly he got up on the roof. We're looking at various forensic pieces to try to kind of piece that together. So more to come on that.
Do you know where the 5-foot ladder was found or retrieved? Was it near the roof, or was it still in his vehicle?
Neither. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that it was not. I know that it was not on scene, and I know that it was not in his vehicle. But we can circle back to you and get to that.
Is there any evidence at all that he may have been in contact with somebody else before this occurred, that may have had any prior knowledge or may have helped him plan this event?
Well, needless to say, that is a question that we're intensely focused on because that would obviously be incredibly meaningful. So far, underline, so far, we have not found any evidence of any accomplices or co-conspirators, foreign or domestic.
And you're using geolocation data to see if his cell phone was near another cell phone, I presume?
Right, we're doing lots of different kinds of cellular analysis, geolocation stuff, looking at his accounts. He, from everything we've seen, which is consistent with what we've learned in interviews, a lot of people describe him as a loner. That does kind of fit with what we're seeing in his devices. His list of contacts, for example, is very short, compared to what you would normally see from most people. So it doesn't appear to be a whole lot of interaction between him, face-to-face or digital with a lot of people.
Okay, thank you.
That doesn't mean there's not any, and that's why we're drilling into. We're trying to talk to anybody who's had any engagement with him whatsoever, digital, in person, classmates, coworkers,
Right.
et cetera.
Wonder if there's anything that you'd like to disclose or provide to the committee or to the public that perhaps has not yet been gleaned during the course of this hearing, and just give you an opportunity, because there's a lot of folks related to the investigation.
One thing I can give an update on, which is pretty fresh here. We had some conversations with some of the members about the access to the roof and the ladder and so forth. And our evidence response teams and their forensic collection, we now believe that the subject climbed onto the roof using some mechanical equipment on the ground and vertical piping on the side of the AGR building. In other words, we do not believe he used a ladder to get up there.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Director Wray, thanks for being here. Where were you when you heard that President Trump was shot, and then what were like your immediate actions, response to that as director?
I was about to have dinner with family, and I was horrified and angry.
I'm just thinking, the reason I asked the question is because I'm still trying to figure out kind of lanes, what the FBI would respond to and what the Secret Service has the responsibility to respond to. Can you just kind of cover that again?
Sure. So the FBI is not responsible for, has never really been part of our mandate or mission for the physical security of venues, of specific protectees or anything like that. That's, if it's somebody within Secret Service's scope, that's their mandate and mission. We are a law enforcement and intelligence agency, and so if you think about it this way, we're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're not the Federal Bureau of Security. You might say, well, what's the difference? Well, there is a difference. We investigate crimes. We investigate threats to national security, but we don't, questions about security posture, the adequacy of resources and assets that were deployed to protect a specific individual, whether there's enough security, and certainly the staffing of that security is not something the FBI, again, we're 116 years old, has historically done.
So at this point, have you been able to go through the shooter's home and kind of document kind of what you found as far as evidence goes?
So we have been able to search the shooter's home. So again, just sort of tying your first question to your second question now, our role is to conduct an investigation of the shooter and the attack. And so we're going to conduct a painstaking, intense investigation of that. We have, among other scenes that we've processed using evidence response teams, in addition to the rally scene itself, of course, we have been through the shooter's home, his bedroom, other parts of the house, et cetera.
Have you been able to establish that he did go to a range and either zero that weapon in or, at least target shoot that weapon prior to the assassination attempt?
So we do assess that he went to a shooting range the day before, not the only time he went to a shooting range. He was a fairly, avid might be a little strong, but a fairly avid, shooting hobbyist. And so he went to, belonged to different sort of clubs and went to certain ranges and that kind of thing. We do believe, based on what we've seen so far, that he went to a shooting range the day before and that he shot an AR-style rifle at that range the day before. I'm not sure we know for sure that it's the weapon that he used, but I think we assessed that it probably is.
Have you been able to interview his parents?
Yes, we have.
And was there anything that was gained from that interview that would lead you to believe that they certainly were aware of what was going on?
I guess I want to be careful about talking about specific people's interviews, but I would say that his parents were cooperative with us. And as I've said before, and hopefully this gets at your question, we have not identified any accomplices, co-conspirators, or anything along those lines.
So it's the FBI's position right now that he still acted independently.
Again, we're still, I know it seems like a lifetime since July 13th, but we're still early stages, but we have not seen anything so far that would suggest to us that he acted with others.
The shooter, as he was on top of the roof, apparently another officer from another police division saw him and quickly ducked down because the shooter aimed a gun at him. And then the shooter apparently, was he prone at the time he took the shot toward the president?
So my understanding is that the local officer who that we're talking about, with the assistance of another local officer, was able to kind of get up and see onto the roof where he observed the shooter, I believe, in a prone shooting position. The shooter then turned and faced him, the local officer, with the weapon.
From the prone position.
That's my understanding.
And then he went back to the prone position.
And this is all seconds before the shooter took his
But that
shots.
entire time, the shooter was in the scope sight of the counter sniper, correct?
That one I'd have to double check on. I know we've interviewed the counter sniper, but I'm not sure I know the
But
answer.
the counter sniper didn't take a shot until after the assassin attempted to shoot the former president and others. He got off 8 shots before the counter sniper shot the shooter. What's with that protocol? Can you get that fixed?
Well, I really want to be careful not to be, given the scope of our investigation, somehow second-guessing the very difficult act and decision it takes for a counter sniper to kill another human being in that situation. It's all happening in seconds. So
8 shots.
Yeah.
And that was after he'd been seen for 20 minutes. I yield back. Thank you.
Director, that's an important question, though, because you've talked to the counter sniper. And that, I mentioned this in our opening statement, that critical 5 minutes from 6:09 to 6:14 and what takes place there is critical. And I think that's what the gentleman was getting at. And we were hopeful that you could tell us something about your interview with the counter sniper.
yeah, I guess I want to distinguish a couple things. There is some individual, not law enforcement, I believe, who spotted the shooter on the roof a few minutes before. But I think law enforcement spotting him with the weapon on the roof is seconds before the
Okay,
shot. So
that's important.
yeah, so I think there's two different things
I think
going
what you're
on
saying
there.
is it wasn't maybe that's, if the bad guy shoots at 6:11, then you're saying this encounter with local law enforcement that Mr. Bentz was just getting into happened just seconds before that and maybe not 2 minutes before that?
That's my understanding. That, in other words, that there's different things here. There's an individual, at least one individual I can think of, not law enforcement, member of the public, who observed him on the roof. Not clear whether or not the individual saw a weapon or not, but saw him in a way that was concerning. That is some number of, not many, but like just a handful of minutes. I think separate from that, as far as law enforcement goes, in terms of a weapon, this local officer that we just talked about observed the individual, again, literally just seconds before the shooter took his shots. Separate and apart from all of that, roughly, I think, maybe a little less than, or around an hour before the shooting, there were local law enforcement officers who observed the shooter, not up on the roof, not with a weapon, but with I believe, a rangefinder, kind of like you would use if you were playing golf or something, in a way that was odd and suspicious. So that started happening with local law enforcement beforehand. But in terms of shooter, meaning with the weapon, law enforcement, my understanding is that the first time that happened was this local officer climbing up on the roof seconds before.
Again, we want that timeline. I think the committee wants that timeline and communications that were taking place in that short period of time.
Again, as I've said with everything else, I really want to be careful. I'm leaning in, trying to share as much as I can here. Facts are evolving, things may change, but we are working on a timeline, among other things.
The information you provided dealing with 8 cartridges from the roof, the drone, the fact that 2 explosive devices were found in the car, 1 at home, that was a remote detonation device that he had on him. The fact that his phone was using encrypted platforms. He only had 1 phone, correct?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, he had 1 phone, although we've identified other phones that he may have used that may not have been his phone. So, for example, we think in certain instances he might have used his dad's phone. Again, not necessarily related to the attack, but we're trying to make sure that we process and exploit every device he could have used. And we keep, which is part of why I keep making this point,
which I know you all are probably tired of me making about this being an ongoing investigation, because we keep identifying new pieces of equipment, new accounts, what have you.
And the fact that you are in real time informing us about what you're finding as you're performing this investigation is very helpful and clarifying. The fact that he went to the range a day before and shot an AR. Now, my understanding is that the AR he used on the 13th was his father's. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. It was originally, his father bought it legally, but then our understanding so far is that his father then conveyed it to him, sold it, in fact, to his son. So originally his father's, at the time of the shooting, the shooter's.
That's, okay, so that's new information. Was that provided to you by the father?
I think it was partly from that. I think we also saw some documentation to support it.
Okay. Investigators also have said that the shooter posted, quote, July 13th will be my premiere, watch it as it unfolds on an online gaming platform sometime before he tried to assassinate President Trump. Can you confirm that, and how much time elapsed between this posting and the attempt on July 13th?
So I'm really glad you asked about that, because that is a situation where, again, in our effort to give real-time information, since we've provided that information, we have since learned that July 13th premiere profile page on the gaming platform, it turns out it was not the shooter.
Okay.
That it was some other individual as part of some sick joke who, after the shooting, created a profile page pretending to be the shooter.
Wow.
And so, of course, that person is now admitted to it, and but anyway, my point being, among the other challenges that we as investigators have, you have people who create accounts in today's world, create accounts pretending to be somebody that they're, and it's not the actual person.
Now,
so that's troubling, obviously, and it makes our jobs even harder as investigators.
Thank you for clarifying that. Did he have an online gaming account?
We do believe he was a gamer, and that he had different kinds of gaming accounts. So that's part of why
Any information gleaned from those?
Not yet, but again, some of those legal process returns I'm still waiting on.
Now, during the attempted assassination, Crooks was wearing a T-shirt from a popular YouTube channel. Have you been able to access his selection of YouTube videos that he's watched?
I believe we have seen some of his search history, but I think we've got a ways to go on that. I know there's some manual work that we're doing on that. I think the most notable thing that we've found recently, which I don't think has been shared until today, is that on a laptop that the investigation ties to him, that on July 6th, it revealed a Google search, and his search, if it was him, again, it's a laptop tied to him. We obviously believe it's him, but we'll continue to investigate. But his Google search was, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy?
Right.
And
horrifying.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you clarify that you have in your possession all of the video that was taken on that day at the scene?
We've collected mountains of video. Part of the reason
you commit to providing us with that video?
Well, we're going to work with the committee and share information as best we can. Part of the reason I hedged on whether we have it all is, as you can appreciate in today's world, everybody with a phone has the ability to take footage, and so we're finding things kind of left and right.
Do you have all the law enforcement video?
I believe we have all the law enforcement video, but we're still collecting evidence.
Okay. And I hope you would provide that to us and to the American people. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, just to be clear, the photo and the message on the online gaming account, I think your testimony was to Mr. Klein that was somebody else posing as the shooter. Is that right?
Correct. Somebody after July 13th created this profile, pretending to be the shooter, and sent us down a rabbit trail, which we've now tied off.
That's important information.
And I think that's very helpful. Did the shooter also investigate other high-profile folks? We had heard some reporting around that early on.
Well, you say investigate other folks. I think this is a place where we still have a lot more work to do. Part of what we did find was a bunch of cached images of a variety of public figures. But again, cached images are those images that you get when you pull up a news story from any number of news sites. If there are photographs in the article, those images are automatically put into the cache on your computer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you were searching for that person's image. We do have the fact that starting around, at the least around the period early July, so the search that I just mentioned,
related to Oswald and Kennedy. That's about July 6th, which is the same day we believe that he registered for the rally. And the day before, he traveled to the grounds for the first time. And so I think there is a certain amount of searches related to former President Trump that during that period we're seeing, consistent with some kind of planning or reconnaissance, if you want to call it that, in advance of the rally. But that's sort of confined to that, or concentrated, maybe is a better word, in that July period, after the announcement of the rally and before the shooting.
Can you speak to the conveyance of the gun? This is a 20-year-old young man. His father owned the gun originally, AR-15, am I correct?
AR style, yeah,
AR
style.
15. 20-year-old man. When did the father sell the gun to him? And what documents do you have? How much money transpired? What date?
Yeah, I do know that, I know, we believe, based on what we've seen, that his father, after purchasing the gun legally, sold the gun to his son. I don't know that I have the date of that transfer or the amount of the transfer, although we may be able to get that to you as a follow. I just don't have it in front of me.
Do you know when the father bought it?
We know. I don't, as I'm sitting here testifying in front of you, I don't have that in front of me, so I don't have it at my
I'm
fingertips.
just wondering if it's proximate to this event.
I do not believe that the gun was purchased, that is the gun that was used. I do not believe it was purchased particularly close in time to the shooting. But how far in advance? It may have been a year before, give or take, but again, we'll go back and double check that on you. I do know that on the day of the shooting, at about 1:30 p.m., he bought 50 rounds of ammunition. So if you think about the day of, or if you back up a little bit, so the day before he goes to the shooting range, the day of he goes to the grounds the morning of the event for, I think, around an hour. He buys the ammunition at around 1:30. At around 3:50 is when he's back on the grounds of the rally, and that's when he used the drone that I've talked about already today. And then, of course, fast forward till just after 6 o'clock when the worst happened.
To deal with that and figure out where we're at. And so, I mean, and you're doing all this. This guy had no combat training, no counter surveillance training that you're aware of, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear
He
that.
had no combat training.
Oh, no, not. I don't think any. Certainly, know what we would call, what you and I would call combat training. Obviously, he was a fairly active recreational shooter, so he did plenty of shooting.
A lot of guys in Western
Yeah.
North Dakota. Be really clear, because there is a lot of this. There is no evidence of another shooter, right?
I mean, another shooter.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the counter sniper who took out the shooter.
Well,
right. But you're talking about like another.
Anybody else? And you're looking at his online and seeing all that, but there's no evidence he had any other accomplices on scene that day, correct?
Correct. Not that we've seen yet, certainly.
About the encrypted applications on his phone, were those there for a while, or did he download them, in the days or weeks leading up to the assassination attempt?
I don't have the answer to that sitting here right now. I think it may vary from platform to platform because he had a number of encrypted messaging apps on it. And again, as I've said, we're trying to get access to that content. And that's important. I think it's important for everybody on this committee to understand that this is a real problem for law enforcement. That these companies, let's be clear here, these companies are designing their platforms in a way to, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how rock solid the legal process,
I'm out of time,
get
so I
access.
want to get to the next question. At this moment, are you confident that high-level protectees, presidents, former presidents, are well protected?
Well, it's not really for me to say. I have a lot of respect for the men and women of the Secret Service who provide protection, just as I do for their counterparts at other agencies.
You can't say one way or the other. Your assessment as director of the FBI whether the president is safe?
I'm not an expert on protective details and physical security. What I would tell you is that we have a very robust system for sharing threat information with those agencies, and that in my experience, the men and women of the Secret Service are professionals who are hardworking, who are literally willing to take a bullet for their protectee.
There's also been reports that the shooter's parents called local law enforcement to say he was missing on the day of the shooting. Is that correct? And if so, is that something that you would see as a sort of a natural thing for them to do? It seems like a 20-year-old who's been missing for a few hours, maybe his parents don't, first thing they do, call the police. What was going on with that situation?
So my recollection, I don't have this in front of me, my recollection is they did call, concerned that he was missing. My recollection, though, is that they didn't call until, this was after the event.
I see.
But I'm not certain of that, so I want to hedge on that slightly because I have to get back to you to confirm that. I believe that part of the issue was that when he last saw his father, he, I think, indicated to his father that he was going to shoot at the range. And then, of course, he didn't go to the range and he didn't come back from that. And so I think that may have added to the level of concern.
Sure. I guess I'm not clear exactly where you said there were 8 shell casings on the roof, so 8 bullets were fired. We obviously know that Mr. Comparatori lost his life. Two other rally goers were injured, seriously injured, and then the one that hit President Trump. Does that account for, were some of these individuals hit multiple times? Where did all 8 bullets go, is I guess my question.
I don't have that in front of me. I'm happy to circle back and get that to you. It's assuming we have that information yet. As I said, I think with respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that that hit his ear. So it's conceivable. Although, as I sit here right now, I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else. But I believe we've accounted for all of the shots in the cartridges. So let us get that.
It's my understanding that the very first one was the one that hit the president. Is that the very first shot, or is that not accurate?
I don't, as I sit here right now, I don't know the answer to that. I believe we know the answer to that. I just don't have it in front of me. That's a hard question to answer. What I would say is I agree with you that his preparatory activity is what we've seen so far. The limited information that has been relevant and interesting about his preparatory activity does seem to be that he had settled on former President Trump as a target and this rally as his moment to try to take a shot. But in addition to the 50 rounds, of course, you have the issue of these explosive devices.
Right.
And so what else he may have had in mind is something that I think is very much of an open question. On the one hand, you have these explosive devices, including the one still back in his home that wasn't in quite the same stage as the one in the ones in the vehicle. But he clearly had those explosive devices for some reason. And so we're trying to figure that out. As I've said before, sometimes in these kind of situations, you find like a manifesto or something like that. It's frustrating to us, and I'm sure frustrating to you and the American people, that we haven't found anything quite like that. We'd love to have a roadmap that tells us exactly what he was thinking. We haven't found that yet. Doesn't mean we won't. We're looking all over the place, and we're going to leave no stone unturned.
You also mentioned that the shooter used encrypted messages to communicate. Specifically, do you know what apps or what apps he was using to communicate, and can you confirm if he was communicating with any foreign nationals through the encrypted messages?
So as to the names of the apps, I don't have that right here in front of me. As far as communicating with any foreign actors, I'll say 2 things. One, we haven't, as I think I've testified before, we have not, at the moment at least, identified any accomplices or co-conspirators, foreign or domestic. Correct. So that as to foreign contacts, of course, that's part of why we want to get access to the encrypted messages, because that might tell us whether he'd been in contact with somebody.
Thank you. She had indicated that Secret Service at the Trump rally did not have any radio recordings. Is that, in your investigation, is that accurate?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I believe there may be some recordings on the local law enforcement side. As to whether or not we have recordings on the Secret Service side, I'd have to drill back into that. And the reason you might say, well, how the heck can you not know? Well, we certainly have interviewed lots of Secret Service employees, so what we know from the interviews versus some other source, as I sit here right now, I don't know.
So on this particular case, but in your experience, and again, it's a different agency, but she had indicated, Director Cheadle had indicated that recordings sometimes are done from radio recordings, I guess, of what happens at a Trump rally or any other thing that they're engaged in. Is that your experience as well, that sometimes there are audio recordings of communications between law enforcement officials?
Just speaking very broadly, there are times when there are recordings, but it'd be hard for me to be more precise than that.
And I know that you can't answer whether they were here in this instance or not, but what would cause recordings to not exist for the Trump rally, if, as a hypothetical? What would be the reason that would happen?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if they didn't record, there may be situations where they just don't record in the first place, and why that would be, though, I'm not sure I can answer that.
Thank you. Let me ask you this, and this is another line of questioning. Director Cheadle had indicated that seconds before the would-be assassin fired the shot, roughly seconds, is when he became a person of suspicion to an actual threat. Would you agree with that assessment from Director Cheadle?
Well, let me try it this way. I think there are sort of three, in my mind, there's sort of three, let's say three significant moments on this continuum that you're kind of getting at. There is roughly an hour before the shooting when local law enforcement observes the individual, the shooter, at that point as somebody that was a person of concern. I forgot the exact phrasing, and that was based on seeing him with this rangefinder. No observation of a weapon, but there was something odd and off about them that caught local law enforcement's attention. So that's the first moment. Then there's a second moment, which is, I think just minutes before the shooting, where local law enforcement observed him on the roof, but didn't see a weapon, is my understanding at that point. And at that point, their level of concern obviously was even higher. And then there's the third moment, which is that moment when local law enforcement saw him, the officer who climbed up with the assistance of his colleague, and saw the shooter in the prone position with the weapon, and that's seconds before the event. And so, terminology, I'm not sure, but it seems to me there's an evolution of concern over that time period.
Correct, an escalating concern. At what point, and this again I just don't know, so I'm curious, at what point is, say, the sniper who killed Mr. Crooks, at what point is he able to fire a shot, and does he have to have authorization in which to do that?
I don't know that I know Secret Service's rules of engagement in that situation. It's possible that our interview of the counter-sniper has uncovered that. Again, our focus has been, I certainly understand why you're asking the question, but our focus has been on the shooter himself and his actions and the attack. These two other reviews, the DHS Inspector General and the outside independent panel, are both looking at the performance of the Secret Service, which would, I'm confident, include the question that you're talking about.
I'm still not clear in my mind. When did the counter-snipers, the good guys, when did they first get eyes on the bad guy, the would-be assassin, on the roof of the AGR building?
I'm not certain, but I'll take my best effort here.
I guess I'm sorry to interrupt, but did they have eyes on him before the local law enforcement was looking up on the roof and engaged with the bad guy shooter?
I don't know the answer to that. I will look into that and get back to you. I believe we have the answer. I just don't know that I have it. I want to make sure I answer accurately.
Because we thought, from the briefings that Mr. Abate gave us, or Abate gave us, excuse me, Abate gave us, and the briefings you gave to Congress, that they did, but it wasn't clear from your testimony. So if you can get that answer to us, that would be helpful. I want to circle back just a third time, if I could, to the Iranian threat to President Trump and some others, former members of our government. The reason I want to go back to that, because we now know that the Secret Service and Homeland Security denied resources to President Trump's detail that they had asked for. And it seems to me, if that all happened after you guys knew about the Iran threat and had briefed the Secret Service on that real threat, that's an even bigger problem. And that's why I was trying to get that timeline down, when you knew about it and when you briefed the Secret Service on the Iranians' threat to kill President Trump.
So again, I really want to be careful to both be accurate, but also not to kind of stray into any kind of classified information or confirm the existence of classified information. So let me see if there's a way for us to get back to you on that question. I understand why you're asking. It may be easier to answer than I think, but at the moment, in an open hearing, I'm not sure if I can see the right way to do that.
Fair enough. We'll expect answers to both of those questions, and you get back to this. That'd be great. Finally, anything else you want to tell us that we didn't ask? I mean, you came today and you told us some things that weren't even prompted by questions, and I just want to make sure if there's anything else you want to tell us regarding July 13th and what you've discovered. Now's the time.
Well, again, we're going to continue to engage with the Congress. I think we've covered a lot of the points that I really wanted to make sure that I got across, and just as I'm looking at my list, in one way or another, through the course of today's questioning, I think we've gotten through most of it.
That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witness for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.